Welcome to the deep dive. We're all about getting past the surface noise, right, to what really matters.
Exactly.
And today, well, we're tackling an absolutely foundational topic, the resurrection of Christ.
hmm
For so many, this isn't just, history, it's the bedrock, the core of everything Christian faith is built on.
It really is.
But, when you talk about something this huge from so long ago, how do we actually grasp it? Like, beyond just hearing the story, what are the details that make it compelling?
That's exactly what we're aiming for today. We're going to dive deep into the sources, especially the Bible itself, look at the evidence for the resurrection.
Okay.
And the goal isn't just a quick overview. We want a careful look at the details, the things that point to it being built on solid evidence, on eyewitness accounts, not just, legends.
Right, not just stories passed down.
Exactly. And, crucially, how does knowing this actually apply to your life? How does it give meaning today?
Okay, so let's unpack that first big point, because something often missed, and I find this part fascinating, is how tied Jesus' death and resurrection are to the Jewish calendar, the traditions.
Absolutely.
Can you help us get a handle on that, like the key things that set the stage, especially how they counted days, because that affects the timing, right?
It's vital. You really have to grasp that a Jewish day, traditionally it starts at sundown, not sunrise like we usually
Oh,
think.
there's sundown. Got it.
So sun goes down. That's the start of the new day. And here's a really critical piece for the resurrection timing.
Mm-hmm.
For ancient Jews, even just part of a day counted as a whole day.
Oh, interesting. So not a full 24 hours necessarily.
Right. So if something happened late Friday, all day Saturday, and then early Sunday morning, to them, that was 3 distinct days,
Ah, okay.
even if it wasn't, 72 hours straight. And that fits perfectly with the 3 days and 3 nights idea without needing Jesus to be in the tomb for 3 full days.
That makes so much sense. That clears up a lot right there. Now, the sources mention holy convocations from Leviticus 23. What were those exactly? And how do Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread fit into this timeline?
Okay, so holy convocations were basically special commanded holy days. They were treated seriously, like a Sabbath, but they weren't tied to the weekly cycle. They could land on any day.
Like special holidays almost.
Kinda, yeah. So on Nisan 14, that's when the Passover lamb was killed. And 1 Corinthians 5 tells us plainly Christ is our Passover.
Right.
The meal itself, the Passover Seder, was eaten after sundown, which, remember, starts the next day, Nisan 15.
Okay, so the meal is on the 15th.
Yes, and Nisan 15 was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that day itself was a holy convocation, a special Sabbath.
So the argument from the sources is that Jesus actually died on that Friday, the first day of unleavened bread, the special Sabbath, not on Passover day itself.
That's the timeline they point to, yeah.
And the unleavened bread, the matzo, there's incredible symbolism there too, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Leaven, or yeast, in the Bible often represents sin, something small that spreads and corrupts everything.
Right.
So matzo, being unleavened, is this powerful picture of Christ's perfect, sinless body. And if you ever, looked closely at a piece of matzo.
Yeah, it's got the lines and the holes.
Exactly. The stripes and the perforations, that's not random. It's seen as foreshadowing his suffering. Think of Isaiah 53. By his stripes we are healed.
Wow.
And the piercings, the holes, symbolizing him being pierced for us. It's incredibly visual.
Which then makes sense of Matthew 28, verse 1, when it mentions Sabbaths, plural.
Right.
It's not a typo.
No, not at all.
It's referring to both that Feast of Unleavened Bread Sabbath on Friday and the regular weekly Sabbath on Saturday. So the resurrection happens sometime after Saturday night on the third day.
And that specific timing, on the third day, it wasn't arbitrary. It was absolutely critical. It was tied directly to Old Testament prophecy about the Messiah.
Okay, which prophecy is that?
Psalm 16, verse 10, and Peter quotes it in Acts chapter 2. It says, the Messiah, God's Holy One, wouldn't have his soul left in hell, meaning Hades or Sheol, the place of the dead. And crucially, his flesh would not see corruption, decay.
Ah, so his body wouldn't decay.
Exactly. And the understanding at the time was that physical decay really started setting in by the 4th day.
Okay.
So if Jesus had stayed dead longer, if he'd risen, say, after 3 full days and nights, his body would have started corrupt. That would have invalidated the prophecy.
So rising on the third day was essential proof. He was the one fulfilling that specific promise.
Precisely. It highlights the incredible detail in God's plan. It shows the Bible as this reliable blueprint, you could say.
Okay, moving from the prophetic timing to, well, the hard evidence, the tomb itself. We all know the story of the empty tomb, but what makes it so impossible to explain away naturally? What are the specific details that really push back against any ordinary explanation.
Right, this is where it gets really interesting from an evidence perspective.
Yeah.
Matthew 27 tells us the chief priests and Pharisees were genuinely worried. They went to Pilate.
Worried about what
They,
specifically?
they literally said they were afraid the disciples would come and steal the body and then claim he had risen. So they asked Pilate to make the tomb secure.
And Pilate agreed?
He did. He told them to make it as secure as they knew how. So they put a Roman seal on the stone breaking that was a capital offense. And they posted a watch of Roman soldiers.
And these weren't just any guards, right?
No, Roman soldiers were highly disciplined elite troops. Breaking a Roman seal, especially while on duty guarding something official, that meant immediate death penalty for the guards involved. It was an incredibly strong deterrent.
So the idea that the disciples who were terrified and hiding could somehow sneak past or overpower these guards, it seems pretty far-fetched already.
Extremely improbable. First, think about the disciples' state of mind. Matthew 26 says they all forsook Jesus and fled at the cross. They were scattered, scared. Not exactly commandos ready for a high-risk mission.
Makes sense.
Second, the guards themselves. Our sources suggest even a small unit, like 4 Roman soldiers, was trained to handle maybe 100 attackers. A few frightened disciples wouldn't stand a chance.
Okay, that's compelling. And what about the stone itself?
Yes, the stone. Mark 16 calls it very great. These tombstones were huge, often weighing a ton or more. They were designed to roll down a slope into place, sealing the tomb.
So getting it open meant rolling it uphill.
Exactly, uphill. Modern experiments on similar first-century tombs show that even a group of strong men, like the 11 apostles, would have found it virtually impossible to move that stone quickly or quietly, especially without tools or leverage.
Wow, so impossible guards, impossible stone. And then there are the grave clothes. John 20 describes John looking in and seeing the linen cloths just lying there.
Yes,
Yeah.
lying in place. And the head napkin, the cloth that was around Jesus' head, was folded up neatly in a place by itself.
So not ripped off or thrown aside like you'd expect if someone had frantically unwrapped a body.
Precisely. Remember, they used about 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes mixed together for the burial. It would have been sticky, like a resin, essentially gluing the cloths to the body and to each other.
Like a gooey mess, basically.
A real gooey mess. If thieves had unwrapped the body quickly under pressure, the cloths would have torn, stuck together, just a mess. The orderly arrangement is, well, it's a silent witness to something else entirely, something miraculous.
Did anyone at the time try to explain that detail? Or did they just stick to the stolen body story?
That leads to another piece of, you could say, indirect evidence what the authorities did next. Matthew 28 tells us some of the guards went and reported everything to the chief priests.
What did the priests do?
They held a meeting with the elders, and instead of investigating or punishing the guards for failing, they bribed them. Gave them large money, the text says,
Bribe them to do what?
to spread a specific story. His disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept.
While they slept. Wouldn't Roman guards be executed for sleeping on duty?
Absolutely. Which makes the lie even more telling. But the key thing is, the authorities knew the tomb was empty. The guards told them something extraordinary happened. Their response wasn't denial of the empty tomb, it was a cover-up. They implicitly acknowledged the body was gone and the guards couldn't stop it. They had to invent an explanation, however flimsy.
So their own actions kind of backfired, becoming evidence against their own story.
In a way, yes. It shows even Jesus' opponents couldn't deny the core fact. The tomb was empty. It really challenges you to think, what evidence do you find compelling when even the opposition had to admit that much?
Now, okay, a point that often comes up. Critics sometimes point to apparent differences in the gospel accounts of the resurrection morning. You know, how many women were there? Exactly when did they arrive? How many angels? Where were they? How do we handle these seeming discrepancies?
That's a fair question, and it's important not to just brush it off. But often, if you look carefully at the details, instead of just assuming contradiction, you see a picture emerge of multiple events, multiple visits involving different people at slightly different times.
So not necessarily contradictions, but different snapshots of a busy morning.
Exactly. Each gospel writer highlights different aspects.
Yeah.
Let's try to trace a possible sequence that fits the accounts together. First, John 20 suggests Mary Magdalene came alone, very early, while it was still dark.
Okay, just Mary first.
She sees the stone rolled away, immediately assumes the worst someone took the body, and she runs off to tell Peter and John. She hasn't seen angels or Jesus yet, just an empty tomb.
So she's operating on incomplete information, basically. Panic.
Pure panic, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Then Peter and John react. They run to the tomb. John gets there first but waits. Peter goes straight in. They both see the linen cloths lying there and that neatly folded head napkin we talked about.
The really significant detail.
Right. And John 20 says when John saw that, he saw and believed. Something clicked for him. Then they leave and go home.
Okay, but Mary comes back, right?
Yes, Mary Magdalene returns, or perhaps never left the vicinity.
Yeah.
John 20 describes her weeping outside the tomb after Peter and John are gone. She looks in, sees two angels this time.
Ah, now the angels appear.
Then Jesus himself appears, but she doesn't recognize him at first. Think he's the gardener. It's only when he says her name, Mary, that she knows it's him.
That's such a personal moment.
It really is. And he tells her, don't cling to me. Or maybe better, stop clinging to me. Because he hasn't yet ascended to the Father. He sends her to tell the disciples he is ascending.
So she becomes the first messenger of the risen Christ. What about the other women? Matthew mentions them.
Right. Matthew 28 says that as Mary Magdalene and the other women were going to tell the disciples, Jesus met them on the road. They grabbed his feet, worshipped him. So possibly a separate appearance to a group of women shortly after his appearance to Mary alone.
Okay, so multiple visits, multiple appearances fitting together. But what about the disciples' reaction? Did they immediately believe the women?
Critically, no. Mark 16 and Luke 24 are very clear. When the women told the apostles what they had seen and heard, the disciples did not believe them. Their words seemed like idle tales.
Wow, even after everything.
Even after everything. In fact, Mark says Jesus later upbraided them for their unbelief and hardness of heart because they hadn't believed those who had seen him risen.
That's actually really important, isn't it? Their skepticism.
It's huge. It completely demolishes any idea that this was some pre-planned conspiracy or mass hallucination they all wanted to believe. They were doubters first. Their eventual unshakable conviction becomes even more powerful because they started from a place of disbelief. It shows the value of really digging into the text, not just dismissing apparent difficulties.
Moving beyond the tomb and the initial accounts, maybe the most powerful evidence is the change in the apostles themselves. These guys went from terrified deserters.
Absolutely. Matthew 26, they scattered, they hid. Peter denied even knowing Jesus.
To becoming incredibly bold witnesses, willing to face anything. What makes that transformation such compelling proof?
It's the sheer 180-degree turn. It's radical. They weren't just intellectually convinced, their entire beings were changed. They went from fear to absolute fearlessness. They became willing to endure imprisonment, beatings, torture, and ultimately martyrdom, all for their steadfast belief that Jesus was alive.
Can you give an example of that boldness?
Look at Acts chapter 5. Peter and the apostles are arrested, brought before the Sanhedrin, the very council that condemned Jesus, and told explicitly not to preach in his name.
What did they do?
Peter basically says, we must obey God rather than men.
Yeah.
They get flogged, a brutal punishment that would leave their backs shredded. And what happens immediately after?
They stopped.
No. The text says they left rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer disgrace for the name. And they went right back to the temple courts and from house to house, teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Christ. They didn't stop.
That's incredible courage. After being beaten like that.
It really is. And the conclusion you draw is pretty stark. Men don't do that for something they know is a lie. People don't willingly suffer and die for a hoax they invented.
Right. You might die for something you think is true, but not for a deliberate deception.
Exactly. This profound shift from cowardice to this unshakable conviction is almost impossible to explain psychologically unless they genuinely encountered the risen Christ. It becomes powerful, living proof. And it challenges you, it challenges us to think about the power of this belief. Does it give us courage today?
So let's talk about those encounters, the actual physical appearances. Acts chapter 1 says, Jesus showed himself alive after his suffering by many infallible proofs, appearing to them over 40 days.
Many infallible proofs. That's a strong statement. And it wasn't just one or two fleeting glimpses. Think about the list Paul gives in 1 Corinthians 15.
Right. He lists specific appearances.
He does. He appeared to Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time. Paul even adds that most of them were still alive when he was writing, like saying, go ask them yourself.
500 people at once. That counters the hallucination theory pretty strongly.
Absolutely. Hallucinations are individual experiences. It's unheard of for 500 people to have the exact same hallucination simultaneously. Then Paul mentions James, likely Jesus' own brother, who was skeptical during Jesus' ministry.
James became a leader in the Jerusalem church.
A key leader. That transformation suggests a powerful encounter. Then Jesus appeared to all the apostles again, and finally Paul says he appeared to him too, on the Damascus road. It's a diverse range of witnesses, individuals, and large groups over an extended period.
And these weren't just spiritual visions, were they? The accounts emphasize his physical body.
Critically important point. Luke 24 has Jesus explicitly saying, "Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have."
He invited them to touch him.
Yes. And he ate food with them, broiled fish, in Luke's account. Ghosts don't eat fish. Later, John writes in his first letter, 1 John 1, about what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life.
So tangible physical proof, not just a feeling or an idea.
Exactly. It refutes any notion that this was just a spiritual presence or wishful thinking. He was bodily resurrected. These numerous physical encounters provide powerful confirmation, meeting any reasonable standard for eyewitness testimony many times over. It invites you to look at this evidence yourself.
Okay, so we've laid out a lot of the evidence, the prophetic timing, the empty tomb, the guards, the grave clothes, the changed lives, the appearances. But let's bring it home. What does all this mean for us living now, 2,000 years later? Why should you care?
It's not just history. It's foundational to everything for a Christian. First off, it's essential for salvation itself. Romans 10, verses 9 and 10 is crystal clear. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved.
So belief in the resurrection isn't optional for salvation, according to Paul.
It's central. You can't really separate his lordship from his resurrection. Denying the literal bodily resurrection means you're fundamentally outside the core definition of Christian faith presented in the New Testament.
And this connects to being born again, or regeneration too, right? You mentioned John 20 earlier, where Jesus breathes on the disciples.
Yes, John 20, verse 22. He breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Theologians often see this specific moment as the point of their regeneration, their spiritual rebirth.
How is that different from Pentecost?
It's seen as the moment they receive the indwelling Spirit for salvation, becoming, as Paul says in Romans 8, temples of the Holy Spirit. Pentecost, later in Acts 2, was more about the empowerment of the Spirit, the baptism and filling for public witness and service, building the church. This earlier moment in John is about the personal, internal transformation made possible by the resurrection.
Okay, that makes sense. The resurrection also explains why Christians generally worship on Sunday, doesn't it?
It's the primary reason, yes. It's not arbitrary. Christ rose on the first day of the week, Sunday. And 1 Corinthians 15 connects his resurrection to the fulfillment of the Old Testament feast of first fruits.
First fruits.
Yeah, Leviticus 23 describes this feast celebrating the very beginning of the harvest. It always fell on the day after the Sabbath during Passover week, which means it always fell on a Sunday.
So Jesus, as the first fruits from the dead, rose on the day that feast was celebrated.
Exactly. So Christians began meeting on Sunday to celebrate his resurrection, the start of the new creation. Sunday also happens to be the day Pentecost occurred, the birthday of the church, which also always falls on a Sunday. So while the Saturday Sabbath was a specific sign for Israel under the Old Covenant, Sunday became the day Christians celebrate the realities of the New Covenant, centered on Christ's victory over death.
And maybe most personally, the resurrection provides hope, right? Especially when facing hardship or death.
Absolutely fundamental. Paul puts it starkly in 1 Corinthians 15. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied.
Because if death is the end,
Then our faith is kind of pointless in the grand scheme of things. But because Christ rose, we have assurance of our own future resurrection. It gives perspective on suffering now. It anchors our hope beyond the grave.
The sources also mention Jesus descending into Hades, or Sheol. What's that about?
Yeah, passages like Ephesians 4 and maybe Luke 16 hint at this. The idea is that between his death and resurrection, Christ went to the realm of the dead, proclaimed his victory, perhaps judged fallen spirits, and liberated the Old Testament faithful who had died believing in God's promise, taking them into God's presence, into paradise or heaven.
So that changed things for believers who die now.
Yes. Now, because of Christ's completed work, when a believer dies, the promise is to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Immediate presence with God, not waiting in Hades.
And that promise in Matthew 16, the gates of Hades will not overcome the church.
That ties in beautifully. Gates of Hades is essentially a metaphor for the power of death itself. Jesus is saying that death, the ultimate enemy, will not prevail against his church, the body of believers he is building, both on earth and those already gathered in heaven. His resurrection broke the power of death.
So the resurrection isn't just one doctrine among many. It underpins salvation, transformation, worship, hope, and the church's ultimate security.
It really is the cornerstone. Denying it isn't just disagreeing on a minor point, it's considered heresy because it undermines the entire structure of the faith. It validates everything Jesus claimed, secures our salvation, fuels our transformation, fulfills prophecy, and gives us an unshakable hope.
Okay, we've covered some really solid ground. Before we finish, let's just briefly touch on something the sources mention as maybe less certain, but still interesting. The Garden Tomb site in Jerusalem. They call it questionable or shaky as definitive proof, but there are some intriguing points.
Right, it's important to approach it with that caution. It's not foundational evidence like the biblical accounts or the apostles' transformation.
Hmm.
But John 19 does say Jesus was buried nearby the crucifixion site, in a garden, in a new tomb never used before.
And the site known as the Garden Tomb today fits some of that description.
It does. It's outside the old city walls. It has features like an ancient cistern and wine press, suggesting it was a garden area. And proponents point to analysis supposedly showing no trace of prior human decay within that specific tomb, fitting the new tomb description.
I also read something about the tomb's structure.
Yeah, there's a detail about one burial spot inside being apparently lengthened, which some connect to traditions about Jesus being relatively tall. Again, it's suggestive, not definitive.
And the possible crucifixion site nearby, Golgotha.
The Garden Tomb tradition places Golgotha very close by, identifying it not with a specific skull-shaped hill necessarily, but potentially as a known Jewish execution site, maybe by stoning, just outside the main northern gate, possibly on the Mount of Olives. From that elevation, some argue, the tearing of the temple veil could have been visible, as described in the Gospels.
But as our sources say, this is all more supplementary. Interesting, but not the core proof.
Exactly. It's fascinating. It adds potential geographical context, but alternative explanations exist for all these points. The tomb could simply have been unused for other reasons. It doesn't carry the same weight as the scriptural testimony, the empty tomb acknowledged by enemies, and the transformed lives of the witnesses. It's a piece of the puzzle, perhaps, but not the cornerstone.
So wrapping this all up, we've really taken a deep dive today. We've looked at the amazing prophetic tapestry in the Jewish feasts, the stark reality of the empty tomb with its Roman guards and impossible stone, the powerful witness of the folded grave clothes.
And the undeniable transformation of the apostles, from terrified men to fearless martyrs. That's hard evidence.
Absolutely. Plus, the sheer number and variety of eyewitnesses who saw the physically resurrected Jesus, those many infallible proofs. It seems like when you really dig into the details, the case for the resurrection gets stronger, not weaker.
It truly does, and the impact is immense. The resurrection isn't just some dusty historical fact. It's presented as the living power behind Christian faith, the very definition of our hope. It shows everything how you understand salvation, the Holy Spirit's work in your life, why you have hope even when facing death. It gives meaning and purpose that, frankly, nothing else offers.
So we've laid out the evidence from the sources. The question now really is for you, listening. What stands out? We really encourage you, don't just take our word for it. Engage with these accounts yourself.
Please do. Take some time this week, maybe, and read the key passages we've talked about. Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, John 20. Read 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's great chapter on resurrection. Look at Acts 2, Peter's sermon connecting prophecy and fulfillment. Read Romans 10.9 to 10 about belief and salvation.
Examine it for yourself.
Yes. Look at the evidence firsthand. Think about what it means. Consider the implications for your own life, your own understanding, your own hope. This isn't just, an academic discussion. The Bible presents it as an invitation to a changed life, grounded in the reality of the risen Christ.